Well, welcome everyone to the Teaching and Learning Committee meeting this October 2nd. And we will start with presentation about the Bridge to Excellence Master Plan. Who's presenting that? And she's not here, so that maybe I started too soon. We did have a speaker, though. We did have someone for public comment, didn't we? Does anyone sitting out there know they'd signed up for public comment? Here's Casey. Okay. Christina Evans, was that? Is Christina Evans here? No. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Are you ready, Casey? Is that okay? No. It's only like a few minutes. We're not going to worry about that. Not today, anyway. Okay. It's good to see you. Thank you.
Likewise. No, good afternoon. I'm Casey Mangle. I'm the Special Assistant to the Chief Academic Officer. And so today I'm just going to do, I think, a fairly quick walkthrough of the upcoming master plan. As you all know, this is our final year of what is the master plan update. So for the past several years, what we've been presenting to the board is an update on a master plan that was written about 5 years ago. This year is the final year of that, and then we'll receive our guidance from MSDE on what that would look like in the future and how that would get updated. I anticipate in alignment with the ESSA Consolidated State Plan and things like that. So what you'll see here is largely familiar. The board has certainly seen it before, so what I would love to do is just go through and point out some of the key highlights of how what we're sharing this year is a little bit different. So this slide provides the background. Please let me know or provide guidance if you think it's necessary to go through each of the slides, or if you'd like me to just kind of do a highlight.
I think a highlight is probably good.
Yes, ma'am.
Everyone's comfortable with that?
Yes,
Fantastic.
we are.
Okay, thank you. I didn't want to be too presumptuous. Okay, so what we'll present at public board meeting, again, is just sort of a very quick background of where we are with the Bridge to Excellence in Public Schools Act. Just kind of helps to set the stage for why we do the master plan every year. Provide a little bit of background on the House bills and annotated codes that are associated with that and why it is that we are required to do this each year. Again, more requirements. We'll certainly go through those. And then we'll get to how we have updated our master plan for this current year. Chief to this is the blueprint overlay. Last year when we presented this, as you all know, the blueprint was in its infancy. So all we had been able to do at that time was share that we were going in that direction, and we had identified sort of three key pillars on which to really anchor our work. We'll go through that a little bit more deeply, and then the PARCC highlight data is always new and different when we present this. So when we present in front of the board, we will do a very quick blueprint highlight. These will all look familiar, albeit maybe in a different format from when Sarah Heaton and some of the other members of the blueprint team presented back in August when we did the blueprint update. These slides really reflect that exact same information. That's what we've included in the master plan as some of the work that has been anchoring what we've been doing over the course of the past year and will continue to strengthen and build on as we move forward to address our student outcomes. So we'll go over the student wholeness bit, the strategy that we presented and the progress on that strategy that we presented back in August. Again, these really are just highlight slides. Same with literacy. Again, you've seen these before. And leadership. Want to spend just a little bit more time here. In our master plan, we always present an executive summary of our data. I don't want to steal the thunder of the PARCC presentation that is up and coming after this, but this provides just a very quick highlight in ELA and mathematics for grades 3, 5, 6, 8, 10 in literacy, and 3, 5, 6, 8 Algebra 1 in math. And then we provide a broad look at the HSA government scores. We'll mention very briefly how there are some mixed results. By and large have gone up in a few areas, although down in a few points in others. That won't be the focus of this presentation, but we do want to make sure that the public knows that we include this summary data in what we share with the state when we're developing our master plan, and that it is these changes from year to year that help us know whether or not our work is really being focused in the areas it needs to be and how we are or not making progress with the strategies we're leveraging. The master plan also asks us to then outline sort of our goals, objectives, and strategies. Last year we presented, and the year prior to, we presented our academic goal. We will be sharing this again and then providing some of the key strategies associated with that academic goal as we work to strengthen our student outcomes in academics. These are largely the same. I think the difference that you see here is a focus on the coordinated professional development, which was included last year, but focused a bit more on our citywides and use language for that specifically. Here you'll see reference to academic planning, which is part of that new calendar that we implemented for this year, so schools could really dig deep into their academic and collaborative planning work. Our master plan always addresses these areas and asks us to provide details as to how we're supporting each students across each of these areas. Sure.
So with these addressed areas, and when there is an exam that is not PARCC, what will we address in this?
Sure, that's a great question. So the master plan begs of us to leverage our PARCC data and like the HSA government data in order to address the goals of the master plan.
So it'll be whatever assessment that the state develops. Okay.
Correct. So in future years, in the next iteration of the master plan, that could certainly look different. The way in which they ask us to present our data could look different, or the different complement of assessments. Teresa, I wasn't sure if you had wanted to buzz in and say anything else.
No, I just wanted to chime in to say that, essentially we would take our lead from the state, and so typically, because this particular Bridge to Excellence Master Plan is a requirement of all the LEAs in the state, they use whatever the state assessments are as the basis for these analyses.
Thank you. So additionally, though, I will say they don't ask us to report out on the results of our other assessments, but the next slide here goes into, and each master plan, we have to provide what our assessment administration strategy is, and so each year we unpack that. Previously, they had asked us to do these sort of large charts and tables. They're not in the same space this year, so they asked us to present more of a narrative of what that looks like and to provide a strategy in an overview kind of way. And so what we see here is we talk to them about our suite of assessments, right? A combination of formative, interim assessments, and summative assessments that help us to really unpack student learning and growth. We talk a bit here about some of the shifts, the notable shifts in our 3-year strategy, these being an addition of an LEA interim assessment, the reduction in the required iReady administration to really require the beginning of year for the majority of our schools, and the removal of PARCC ELA 11 and Algebra 2 requirements. So those have been some notable shifts in our assessment strategy. To sort of nod back to your previous point, though, what we focus on in the master plan and what the state begs of us is our results associated with the PARCC exam. What I think is most critical out of all of this, because we've seen much of the previous information before, is the timeline. As you know, we're here today. We present this presentation to the public board on October 9th. October 12th through November 9th, we will be opening an open feedback opportunity for the community. So after it goes live to the board, in years past we've done 2 things. One is we've posted an open survey link on our website, and so we'll work with communications around that. I've also provided my email directly, as that tends to just feel a little bit more accessible for people. So happy to make sure that we're connecting directly with the community in that way. But there will be an open feedback opportunity for just about a month. Our draft annual update has to be submitted to MSDE by October 15th. And so, working together with our offices, we're fully prepared to meet that deadline. From October 15th to 22nd, MSDE will review and provide us with feedback. By October 24th, the state will be submitting to us any clarifying questions, at which in our next opportunity to be in front of the board, we would share any of those as well as the community feedback and adjustments that were made to our master plan based on the feedback received from the state as well as from the community. We do that on November 13th, and November 16th, the final plan goes to the state. Typically, we anticipate receiving some notice of approval and no-goes and things like that associated with the master plan in December. Okay, there we go.
Thank you. That's
You're welcome.
very helpful. Commissioners, any, yes?
Just a couple of things. First of all, I am really happy to see that we are anchoring our plan around the blueprint so that it doesn't seem so much as a separate, in the past, it's felt like one thing that goes into the state and one thing that we're doing. So I think that's really a great plus. During the open feedback time, I know you're saying it's open to the public. Will there be a specific presentation to PCAB? Is that a part of the plan at all?
That isn't something that we have done in the past.
Okay.
I'm certainly open to exploring that. Yeah, of course.
I just knowing their interest in really
Sure.
taking a good look at things, that might be just a good suggestion. And then the final, and I get, we will be receiving it, but we will not be voting until all of the feedback from both public and initial from MSDE comes in, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
The board vote won't be until that November 13th date.
Okay.
Correct. So the 9th is really a very similar preview and queue up for you all and for the community that it's available to access and review.
Okay.
Yes.
On slide 19, one of the notable shifts is removing the Algebra 2 requirements. That's the assessment requirement,
Correct.
not the actual course
Correct.
requirement.
Correct.
So, question, are we moving in the direction to change that requirement as a graduation requirement, the Algebra 2?
Chief.
So yes, you're correct. That is about just the assessment there. And this past school, the 17-18 school year, we did all-day SAT. And through our feedback groups, principals, schools, the team felt that assessment was actually more valuable, getting information to support teachers with their instruction and supporting their students. But no, at this time, we are also not having conversations about removing Algebra 2. I want to say during the 17-18 school year, we had limited conversations, maybe more in the exec board, and there was a recommendation from my office that we have Algebra 2 as part of our requirement.
It's not random, but I'm curious. Who does so what office in MSDE reviews the master plan? Is it I'm sure it's a specific office. I'm just curious.
Well, so no, actually, I mean, while we have a contact at MSDE that supports the master plan here and provides all of the documentation and things like that, it's a cross-functional effort because along with the narrative that we provide budget background, we also provide all of our fiscal year 19 applications for Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, Title V, right, so we provide all of the grant applications as well. So that's a cross-functional
Sure.
effort on the part of MSDE.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to the PARCC results, yes? Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Teresa Jones. I serve as our Chief Achievement and Accountability Officer, and with me I have
Christopher Wan, and I'm our Director of Research.
So this afternoon, what we'd like to do is to provide a little bit of a deeper dive into the 2018 PARCC results. The way this presentation is structured is we're first and foremost going to do a little bit of a refresher just based on the results having come out back in August. So we'll do some top-line reviews. From there, we'll share a little bit about the insights around growth, and then we'll talk specifically about student groups. Once we've talked about the student groups, we're going to bring up some of our friends from the academic office to also talk more about the content connections within mathematics and ELA. And then we'll wrap up with just a preview of some of the other presentations to come that will also provide insight around how the PARCC data are being used to inform district strategies and actions in our schools.
All right. So just a quick refresher, this slide and the next slide are the ones that we had previously shown in our August 28th presentation to the public board meeting. And we're giving a high-level overview of how our district performed in grades 3 through 8, both last year and this year, and we've also provided a comparison to the state of Maryland. So quickly, we are up across the board, 1 to 3% among our grades 3 through 8 assessments. The state also was up in most of their tests. They decreased in 3rd grade ELA and math, as well as 6th grade math and 8th grade math. Two highlights I want to point out here is that the test that we see the highest results on usually is the 7th grade ELA assessment, and that that's also seen for the most part at the state level. I also want to point out our 8th grade math results tend to be the ones that have the lowest proficiency level, and that's due large in part to the fact that a lot of our more talented 8th graders, as we expand our Algebra 1 access, are beginning to take a more challenging exam. So those students, had they taken the 8th grade math test, we would have expected to be proficient, and that's why that number is low both for ourselves and for the state.
Student is in, may I?
Yes,
If an 8th grade student is in Algebra 1, they don't take the 8th grade PARCC.
That is correct. So they would take the Algebra 1 PARCC and not the 8th grade math PARCC.
Okay.
Here we have an overview, same thing, of our high school results with the additional caveat brought in. As we mentioned previously, that this was the first year that students had a graduation requirement set in order to pass the test. So we have test results presented for students who took the test for the first time, as well as students who had to come back and retest for the purpose of meeting that graduation requirement. So while our overall numbers decreased in many of the tests, with the exception of ELA 11, Algebra 1, for example, went from 11.4 to 8.9. If we parse out just our first-time test takers, we actually see that we achieved about a 2% increase in that group. And a lot of the patterns we see are also the same that we're seeing at the state level. So Maryland as a whole also experienced a large decrease in those two assessments due to, retesting.
May I just, because you mentioned the Algebra 1 before, and maybe you're going to do this, and maybe I've read it and I'm sorry, but within that first set, first-time test takers for Algebra 1 that seem to go up, have we broken out to see how many of those are actually the students that we were referring to earlier that aren't taking the regular 8th grade test, but
Yeah, we have about, I think, 600 students who are 8th graders and take the Algebra 1 out of a total that's about 4,000. We can get you those exact
Okay.
numbers, but yes.
that'd be interesting to see. Okay, thanks.
So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about growth, and I really like to think of these slides actually more of being acceleration slides, because what we're going to be showing is that not only are we growing students, but over time, our ability to grow students has increased. So we're growing students at a higher level and seeing more students come out with improved performance over time. So we have taken the PARCC test now for 4 years. We started in 14-15, with this most recent year being 17-18. That's created 3 intervals or 3 opportunities that students have had to grow. And those are what we're seeing here on this graph. Every year, we have students who are able to make growth to a high degree, which enables them to reach higher PARCC performance level. So for example, I might start as a level 1 in my first year taking the PARCC, and then I grow to a level 2, 3, 4, or 5 in the next year. And that's what this graph is trying to show. It's showing the percentage of students across each of our performance levels that we're able to grow to a higher performance level in that year. So for example, in the first growth period we have, 2015 to 2016, we saw 32% of our level 1 students in ELA grow to be a level 2, 3, 4, or 5. That was again 32% and then 33% and the third interval. And we can see over time that across most of our performance levels, we are increasing the number of students who are able to make that significant level of growth that gets them to the next performance level. So this is what I was trying to get at when I was mentioning that acceleration. We're growing more students with each passing year. And that remains true in most tests. It's somewhat flat among our level 1 students in math that I think went 31, 30, and 30. But in most cases, you're seeing pretty sizable increases of students that are able to make that performance level jump from one year to the next. The key from that previous slide is our level 3 students, and I want to tie that into this next slide. So level 3 students are very close to meeting a proficiency level. You need to have a 4 or 5 to be marked as proficient, so level 3 are just the kids that are almost there, approaching those expectations, but haven't quite made it yet. If those students are able to grow to the next performance level, and we have a large number of them grow to the next performance level, we start to see changes in the underlying proficiency rates at each of our schools. So that's what this slide is highlighting. We're looking at the number of schools that were able to create large changes, positive changes, by 5 or more proficiency points from one year to the next in their PARCC performance. So from 2016 to 2017, we had 7 schools that did that in math, 11 that achieved that in both subjects, and then 17 that did that in ELA. Then in the next year, from the period 17 to 18, we increased that across the board to 11 in math that were able to increase by 5 or more points, 12 in both subjects, and then 21 in ELA alone. So this is also a slide that we presented on the 28th. And one really neat thing to appreciate about where the growth is occurring is that if you look at that map, it's occurring almost all over Baltimore City. So it doesn't have specific socioeconomic areas associated with it or areas of the city. We're really seeing schools achieve this level of growth across the whole entire city. For this next section, we're going to look at one more way that we measure growth, and it's a very important one because it is the way that MSDE has chosen to evaluate our schools in the upcoming year on their school report cards. And that is through use of a student growth percentile, which we call an SGP. So quickly, just to go over what an SGP is. An SGP is a calculation that basically answers the question, how much progress did a student make when you compare them to students with similar prior test scores? So an SGP is a number, it's a percentile on a scale of basically 1 to 100. And higher numbers represent higher numbers of growth. Lower numbers represent lower numbers of growth. And an average level of growth is about a SGP of 50. So to calculate an SGP, we take every student that has tested in 2 consecutive years on PARCC and compare them to all other students that started with that same test score. So if I scored a 700 in the first year I took PARCC, I'm then compared to every other student that started at a 700, and the SGP I get is the percentage of students who started in the same place as me that I either scored higher than or equal to in the following year. So it's a relative comparison that takes into account a student's starting position. When we need to roll those up to the school level to analyze school level performance, the procedure we use is we take the median of all of their students' SGPs. So that's the midpoint of all of their students' SGPs, and then that becomes the median SGP for school level performance. Some categories to help kind of make sense of what the SGP number means are in that bottom right-hand corner. And SGPs 1 to 20 are usually considered very low levels of growth, 20 to 40 low. Average or typical SGPs are 41 to 60, and high, very high, 61 to 80 and 81 to 100. The vast majority of SGPs, when they're calculated, are in that 40 to 60 range. So to really have ones higher than that represents a very significant amount of growth. So what we've chosen to highlight in this presentation is the number of schools that are achieving these very high median SGPs. And another point I want to make is that these SGPs are calculated across the entire state of Maryland. So when a student in Baltimore City is compared to all other students with that same started score, they're compared to all other students in the state of Maryland. So this really helps also provide, in a way, a comparison of how our students are doing, not just relative within Baltimore City, but across the state as a whole. That being said, we have an increasing number of schools that are really demonstrating very high SGPs. So here we've taken a look at the number of schools that were able to show that progress with a greater than 70 median SGP from last year to this year. And you can see across the board, both in our elementary grades, ELA and math, and our middle grades in ELA and math, that number has increased from last year to this year. And we have 2 years of this data so far, so that's what's being presented here. So we've chosen to highlight some schools that have achieved this very high level of growth in the next 2 slides. So we have a list of schools here in grades 3 through 5 and 6 to 8 that achieved greater than 70 median SGPs. And you can see that we have 2 schools on there, Thomas Johnson and Lakeland, that managed to do this for both their 3 to 5 and 6 to 8 grade bands. So across the entire school achieving high levels of growth. We've also then plotted these schools on a map using our Community Conditions Index. So this is an index that ranks economic investment in certain regions in Baltimore City. And we can see that several of the schools here are achieving these high levels of growth in the areas that are colored red, which are areas of low socioeconomic investment. So these are the results for ELA. And we have another slide that shows the results for math. So somewhat a more diverse mapping picture here, more spread out across the city. But again, these schools achieving extremely high levels of growth by a state comparison in our city. I'm sorry, yeah.
Do we have information on how, are there any trends on what these schools were doing in order to achieve this type of growth?
Yeah, so that's something we've been working with teaching and learning around, and I think that they'll be talking about some of the strategies that have been put in place in the curriculum later in the presentation. We've also started to sit down, Teresa and I, with folks from the schools office. We presented this list of schools to them to try and start, finding out what they know about what's going on in the schools and make connections with the efforts they're making and the results that they're achieving.
We are, as a part of that, noticing that there have been some indicators. Again, there's still work to be done to confirm that these are all consistent across the board. Mm-hmm. One has to do with leadership.
Sure.
So looking at the quality of leadership, consistent leadership over time. And that's not just the principal, but that's also leveraging the instructional leadership team. Mm-hmm. Also taking a look at the structures in place, how they're using their data, how they are operating on a regular basis, really unpacking the data, making adjustments to meet the needs of various students, so on and so forth. And then also, I think I have it called out here. I think I have, where's my third one? And then community involvement. I think that was another thing that we were starting to see in terms of how they're engaging families, how they're leveraging resources, partnerships, so on and so forth. Again, all driven by the needs of the students, but tailored to the communities and what they're able to bring to bear.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you.
It's also a little bit of a segue into my next series of slides. One thing we have been working on, and this has been in collaboration with our human capital team, is to look at how teacher level information can contribute to PARCC growth. So this is a work in progress. We're continuing to think of new data points and new ways to look at this information. But I have a couple takeaways here to present to you guys as a sort of a first look. And one is that even after controlling for economic disadvantage, teachers or schools that have a higher teacher retention rate also have higher PARCC proficiency in both subjects. So we know that there's a correlation. Again, we can't establish that this is the cause, but there's a correlation between retention rate and PARCC performance that persists even after we subtract out the effect of different economic disadvantage rates in our schools. And then another data point that we would like to present is the scale score impact by teacher effectiveness ratings. So these are the effectiveness ratings that come out of our evaluation framework for teachers. And we can say that highly effective teachers have the highest increases in student scale scores, even after controlling for prior test performance, economic disadvantage, disability status, and English learner status. So we've tried to subtract out a lot of the student level characteristics that can explain some of these differences. And this is the result we see. So on the graph, each of those evaluation categories, highly effective, developing, and ineffective, is being compared to a baseline of an effective teacher. So what we're seeing is that if you have a highly effective teacher in ELA, you on average will achieve 6 points more growth than an effective teacher, and then correspondingly developing an ineffective teacher slightly less amounts of growth. So this is speaking to one that our evaluation system is capturing teacher performance in a way that aligns to PARCC. One thing we would like to do going forward is extend this look, which was just done on the 2017 to 18 interval, to multiple years. So what is the impact when a student is continuously exposed to a highly effective teacher versus being exposed to teachers that are developing, ineffective, or just effective? So we're continuing to do this work with HC and dig into the data, and we hope to keep you guys up to date on that work.
Thank you, Chris. Now we're going to transition into our student group conversation. And as we talk about student groups here, if you will bear with me, I'm also going to share with you a little bit of a different view than what we traditionally see when we think about student group performance and we think about gaps as it relates to student group performance. So the first one we're going to talk about is for the African American student group. So a couple of things to note. One is, as a part of the state's adoption of the new accountability framework, the state is actually going to be presenting student data in the way that we're showing it here, which is basically by dichotomous group. So what you'll notice here is we've labeled the African American students versus non-African American students. You're going to see that theme carry through for race, ethnicity, as well as students with disabilities and English learners as the way that the state will be presenting the scorecard data when that becomes public. As a function of that, what we've also started to do is look at our data that way as well as the traditional way, which has been primarily versus the highest performing groups within that student group. So what we're looking at here is for African American proficiency, notably, we are actually seeing an increase in the gap, which is not what we want to see as a district. We all talk about wanting to close the gap. While we think gap closure is important, we also need to acknowledge that there are two ways to close a gap. One way of closing the gap is the way we all want, which is you increase the performance of the lower performing student group. The other way is you have a decrease in the performance of the higher performing student group. And so one of the things that was really interesting for us as we started to dig into the data is that we were finding that some of the schools that were actually showing their improvements and narrowing of their gaps, it was actually happening in both ways. So what we've decided to do is rather than just focus on gap closure, we're going to focus the conversation on those schools that are doing well with that otherwise underperforming student group. As it relates to those schools, we're going to highlight a few schools here, and then we're also going to break it down a little bit when we start looking at benchmarks. So the first thing we wanted to call out was thinking about schools that are actually showing high proficiency rate of African American students. You'll see the ELA schools listed on the left and the math on the right. Well, these are essentially the top 5 schools that have shown increases in their proficiency rates over that 1-year period from 2017 to 18. It is a mix of schools, so you'll see some K-8, you'll see some elementaries in there, you'll see a mix of charters and traditionals in there. So part of going back to Commissioner McFadden's question about what's happening within some of our schools, we are seeing that there are some of those themes, interestingly enough, that we tend to hold up in some ways as best practices for charters that we are experiencing in some of our traditional schools as well, and those things are contributing to some of the results that we see. The other piece is this whole question around really knowing your students. We've also found that schools that have really embraced the cultures, particularly when we think about African American students and how do you connect with being in Baltimore, so on and so forth, that some of those schools that have started doing that work, even prior to the implementation of the blueprint, are some of the ones that are sort of bubbling up as having some best practices worth replicating. The other thing that we noted here too, and we've put on here for reference the percentage of African American students in each of those schools, is there's also a case to be made in terms of the diversity of the school. So we're also noticing that those schools that have an increased amount of diversity in schools seem to be outperforming some of our schools that are predominantly African American. And there has been prior research that has spoken to this finding. It's also playing out with some of the schools that we are noticing through our analysis. Sure.
I'm sorry. Which I find interesting. What is the state defining as African American? Because in other places, people are being very careful to say African descent because we have 3 distinct cultures within that grouping. And I know it's in Baltimore, African National, we have Afro-Caribbean, and we have African American. So is the state lumping all that together into this definition?
That is my understanding.
Okay.
So it's been, primarily self-reported in terms of which category they place themselves into. So it's essentially African American, you have Hispanic/Latino, that's how they still refer to it, white, and then there's an other category. I'm not aware of them doing any other data collection that would disaggregate within that African American or Black student group to be able to get at the subgroups that you just described.
Yeah, because it would be interesting for us, because there are sections within our system with immigrant students that are bringing some other issues, although they may look all alike, but they're very different in terms of the way we need to address them. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. So this next slide speaks to a different view of the data, and this is the first time that we've taken this particular look. Again, part of our quest has been trying to figure out what really helps us better understand what's happening in the district and happening at the school level. So what we've done here is the following. On the left side, you'll see a column that says District Non-African American Percent Proficient. What we've essentially done is we've established benchmarks to say, how are the non-African American students performing district-wide, and how do our schools then compare with their African American student performance to the extent that they're actually beating that benchmark. So as an example, the ELA 3 to 5 grouping, 29% proficiency is the district's percent proficient rate for non-African Americans. What you'll see to the right are the top 5 schools that have African American percent proficiency that is above that 29% threshold. Similar. That's correct. That's correct. And again, that's one of the benefits of just making it dichotomous, just being African American versus non-African American. It gives you a little bit of a cleaner view, even though there are limitations around interpretation because of that. So again, what this view is intended to do is to be able to help us understand where are some of the schools in our district that have African Americans, that students that are performing, to a large extent better than what we would expect for the non-African American students across our district. And again, we've shown the top 5 here for the top 2 categories. For ELA 10, we only show 3 because there were only 3 that actually outpaced the 29.4% referenced on the left. And again, this is the ELA view. And then also for reference, we also included a math view. And again, you'll see a mix of schools there. So no surprise, a lot of the schools that you see here were also on the list of schools that we identified before in terms of increase in proficiency, so on and so forth across the district. And that's primarily because we are a largely African American district. So you would expect to see similar themes. But again, you do see a mix of schools, traditional, charter, et cetera, represented across various parts of the city. To the earlier question around, well, what does this all mean for us? Is there anything we can take away? These were the 3 things that I referenced earlier that we have noted in terms of some of the schools' best practices. I'd also just call attention to some of the work that we're doing around the blueprint, because that also speaks to how we can address student needs. So specifically, as we think about the work we are doing around our curriculum and being able to have curriculum that connects with students and students' ability to see themselves in the curriculum, there's work underway around identity projects, which will also tap into the Baltimore legacy that students have and the connections there. And so it just speaks to the fact that the school's work coupled with our content and district work have to come together in meaningful ways at the schoolhouse in order to move our students forward. And so what we're going to do next is move away from this African American student group view, and we're going to talk briefly about what did we unpack a little bit about students with disabilities and English learners. I will say for English learners and students with disabilities, there's going to be even more information in each of the subsequent presentations focused on that group. So today, there will be a Students with Disabilities semi-annual update, so you'll hear more about the PARCC connections and strategies there. There will also, at the end of our presentation, there's a slide that will capture what that means for the additional student groups, as well as, our turnaround presentation and things of that nature. So we were trying to be choiceful here to just focus on some of the top lines so that there is some background around it, but know that there is more to come.
Great, thank you, Teresa. So as Teresa said, I'm just going to hit the two highlights of both the students with disabilities and ELs, along with some of the practices that we're implementing across offices. So you'll see on slide 18, students with disabilities still looking at proficiency gaps here across the 3 years of implementation from 15 to 18. And you'll see at the bottom that the students with disabilities line is in that orange color code, and at the top is students without disabilities. And you'll see the still large perceiving gap in both literacy and math along that work. You'll see gains slightly, but not nearly enough of what we're looking for yet, but you'll still see that gap analysis there. So some of the work that we're doing in the Office of Special Education and Specialized Learning and Teaching and Learning are really falling in and across 3 buckets of inclusive practices, student support, and staff development. So that in inclusive practices, we're really monitoring the use of the academic tool to look at the LRE placements and where students are and where they need to be for the core instruction. Thinking about the development of schedules to ensure inclusive opportunities so that students have opportunities to move in and out of the groupings where they are. Looking at student support, thinking about the intervention and the research-based opportunities both for literacy and math to intervene, knowing the data of what our students need, as well as blended learning opportunities, and greater access to grade level content material. So as Teresa highlighted earlier, as you know, we had the curriculum shift in literacy. So both math and literacy with a high quality curriculum, really thinking about approaches to grade level standards for our students with disabilities, which requires ongoing staff development that you see on that right-hand side. So opportunities that are targeted to teachers, school leaders, as well as IEP chairs. So looking for alignment in what folks are learning and keeping their eye on as they're in classrooms. And then finally, ongoing supports to not only special educators, but general educators, knowing that those groupings are flexible and how we want students to engage in the work, and attention to specially designed instruction. When we move and look at the English learner proficiency gaps, you'll see the same snapshot that you did in special education. So you'll see that the English learners are at the bottom and the non-English learners are at the top. You'll see still a gap here, but you'll notice a large relative increase despite the percentages being small in both ELA and math, so that our non-English learners are actually increasing, as well as our English learners within that. So you'll see gap analysis closure there with our percentage happening.
And really quickly, I just want to highlight that. So that means that this is the one student group where we actually are closing the gap, and we're actually seeing upward movement for both groups.
Great, thank you. And if you take a look at the next slide, again, in the same bucket, the way we've analyzed this is really, again, with those inclusive practices. So there has been additional guidance around the ESOL instructional models. So when students get instruction, what is their timing, what does their grouping look like? There's been tight alignment with the differentiated learning office, really working with literacy and math to think about curriculum alignment and updates and overlays to support instruction. And again, that focus on grade level standards, making sure students have exposure to the content as their core and grade level expectation. For student support, really thinking through the differentiation and appropriate scaffolding that needs to happen for students, ways that we're integrating whole child and language development across the content areas for the English language learners, and then ways that we're collecting monitoring data and measurable spots where we can adjust instruction as needed for students. And then finally, a focus with the staff development. Not only has the professional development been an aligned effort, but really the work around recruiting and hiring strategic. So looking at expansion of what types of teachers do we need, what exposure do they need, and reaching and casting a broad net. The team has been working very closely with the Office of Human Capital to ensure that our teachers can support our students. And then collaborative teaching and coaching has been an ongoing work of the professional development for this office.
Just one quick question. When you are identifying the English learners, that's strictly, that's the only area that we're looking at? Those aren't children that may also be receiving special education services?
That's correct.
Okay.
Beth, you wanna-
Good afternoon, everyone. So this slide here is taking us through some of the growth that we've seen.
Would you mind just introducing yourself?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Beth Sappy, Director of Math.
Ashley Cook, Director of Literacy, Language, and Culture.
Thank you.
So the slide here is around students meeting or exceeding expectations in math across 2016 to 18. So it's exciting for us to see that we have that positive trend going across grades 3 through 8, where we are increasing our students on meeting those expectations. If we look at the Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 across the 3 years, it does not look as great, but when you pull out the students that are not testing for the first time, we are either staying level or also increasing across those 3 years. So priorities, we're going to sort of shift gears and think about how are we using this data in order to inform how we are supporting teachers and leaders. So this year, we're focusing in on curriculum and assessments around how we're implementing those supports, that ongoing feedback and data analysis to support schools, so really using data and feedback to make those decisions as we move forward, and also targeting that professional learning based off that feedback and the data. So this is both for ELA and math. As we think about what we heard and observed. So we've talked in the past around our cycles of professional learning and a lot of the professional learning we were doing. What we've heard was through Aspen, Critical Friends, our PD advisory groups from teachers, principals, was we need to get the PD directly to classrooms, into the teachers. Focusing in on content, grade level content, curriculum, and those high leverage instructional strategies. And that it needs to support school-based teaming and planning. So how are they being supported while they're planning within their schools? So with that, we developed a theory of action in alignment with the Chief of Schools Office and the Chief Academic Office. So ultimately, it's to improve those student outcomes, our teachers must be developed in the most efficient and effective systems possible. One that's school-based, is rooted in those standards-aligned curriculum and content knowledge, and really looking at those evidence-based instructional strategies. So with that said, we have thought a lot about how we are going to implement professional learning for teachers and how we're really using that data to make those decisions. So here we're going to go through a story around grade 6 in math. So as you're envisioning this, think about this through the math and the ELA lens, because we're doing the same thing in both. We're just going to use the example of math to go through this. So if you see on this slide, you can see, the overall scores. The scale scores are information that we have that we can see overall where our students are. Then when we're thinking about the specific math, we really got to dig deeper and think about what is that content specifically at each grade level. So in this slide, you can see around the different domains in grade 6, and then even breaking it down into the cluster level. So when we're making those informed decisions around what type of professional learning we're going to give to teachers and our leaders, we want to make sure we're grounding it in that data. So for example, the reason why we're circling racial proportions, because in grade 6 in October, that's the content that teachers will be implementing with their students. When we go even one step deeper, it goes to the specific standards. So on a daily level, teachers are working really on those specific standards. So you can see here, I cannot see because it's too small, that we're going to just pull out one. So if we look at 6 RP A3B, that's solving unit rate problems. That's still the ratio proportion standard in grade 6. As a district, we were at 19.9% proficient. That means, and 100% of our students had a task in PARCC that was aligned to that standard. So to the right, you can see a typical PARCC task that would be aligned to that standard, and then also the ANET data to show were we sort of consistent across PARCC and ANET, and then what are we going to do this year in order to really deepen teachers' content knowledge and proficiency on students so that we can see growth around these standards.
One quick question. Sorry, I
you're
should know
fine.
this, I'm sure, but so what does ANET stand for?
Achievement Network. So
Okay.
those are our formative assessments that we do in mathematics
Thank you.
quarterly. So this is a visual to really ground in what does that virtual ongoing professional learning look like. So we're using that data and the feedback that we've received around really getting to the teachers. And we thought about what do teachers need and how can they engage together. So with that, we developed a cycle. So they're getting constant inputs virtually around content, best practices, the continuum of learners. So we're looking at our gifted and learning population, our EL population, our special ed population, and then also assessments and data. So how are we really using that data in our classrooms to make those informed decisions? And an example of what this looks like for grade 6 in math is in the month of October, we are focusing in on Module 1, Topic C and D. So when we're building out and really doing professional learning for our teachers, we are creating videos and instructional inputs for teachers, and it's going to be grounded in the content in Eureka Math, and the same for Wit and Wisdom. So really looking at that content, unpacking that, deepening teachers' content knowledge around the coherence, the rigor of what that mathematics looks like, and how it should be implemented in their classroom. In October, around the best practices, so really that pedagogy, we're focusing in on the aspects of rigor. So really looking at conceptually, how are students engaging in this mathematics? How are they doing it through the concrete representations? And then the procedures, and then getting to that application. So really unpacking that this month. And then around the continuum of learners, we're thinking around that culturally responsive teaching. So giving teachers the opportunity to think about that as they're implementing their lessons in class. And then lastly, the assessment. So in this example, this is just October, but in October, we're really normating open response scoring around that achievement network assessment. So when they take their quarterly assessments, students do some of the writing, and we really want teachers to make sure that we're all grounding our understanding and our scoring in the same fashion. So if you look below, I know there's a lot on this slide, but if you look down the arrow, these are also resources that we're sharing with leaders and teacher facilitators so that they see the highlights and they can see the bigger picture of what teachers are engaging with throughout the month. I'm going to click this button and hope that the video starts. So before we get that started, I just want to give you a quick, these videos are about 10 to 12 minutes around the content that we share with teachers, and through that they're doing work. So it takes a little longer than the 10 to 12 minutes of a video. It's really going deep into content, thinking about misconceptions students may have, thinking about implementation of that content using the strategies. So we're just giving you like a 40-second, very fast clip so you can sort of see what's happening.
What did you mention? You mentioned Liberty, you also mentioned Gwynns Falls, so that might be interesting.
In academic planning, which teaching and learning talked about earlier, there is that continuum of learners. So there's a real focus on gifted and talented, ESOL students, as well as students with disabilities. So there are resources embedded with that professional development as well that's online, virtually accessible to teachers, as well as some online resources for supports with planning that they can access for general and special education teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ray. Again, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation. Very interesting. Thank you. I think we're ready to talk procurement.
Good morning, or good afternoon, sorry. I'm Jeff Parker, Director of Procurement for the school system. We have two contracts before you for consideration today. The first contract is with Apex Learning and Edmonton Incorporated. This is to provide a high school credit recovery program to city schools. The contract term is for 3 years. The estimated amount for Apex is $250,000 per year, and for Edmonton, it's $50,000 per year. Any questions?
So is this for, this isn't all high schools with this, or is it?
This is a high school credit recovery program.
So all high schools have access to this if they have students that need to recover credits?
Correct. The schools will purchase the licenses for those students. It also works with a teacher. It's an 80-20 blend, so the teacher has to participate, and the student works online for the other 80% to complete their coursework.
And it's two different contracts, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to clarify, okay, for the funding source, I understand, so schools are putting forth some funds from their own school-based funds, and then the district has allocated funds for this.
Correct, and
Okay.
we also have a grant from the N.E. Casey Foundation for
Okay.
$192,000 to go
Okay.
towards this effort.
Is that Annie Casey and the Open Society Institute, both of them together?
Yes.
Thanks. That's with both of them, or just that one?
So, okay, so you're asking,
No, I'm sorry. We haven't gone to the Science Center yet, have we?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, sir.
we're just on the Apex and the Edmond. Okay? Thank you.
The next contract is with the Maryland Science Center. This is a contract in the estimated annual amount of $75,000. It primarily provides, Family Science Night is the larger recipient of resources. It also provides admission to the observatory, Davis Planetarium, IMAX, et cetera. And so we're asking the board to approve a contract for them through June 30th of 2022.
So there is a family science night. Is this cost for that, or is it for,
So there's a program called Family Science Night. It costs $1,500 for
Okay.
each event,
okay,
and the schools usually pick up the cost for that.
okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yep.
And that Science Center, so going to the planetarium costs, I thought that the Science Center was free for public school students.
So
and
the basic admission.
Public, private, all schools in the state.
So the basic admission to the Science Center is free,
Mm-hmm.
but the admission to enrichment experiences, the planetarium, IMAX, traveling science programs, et
Those
cetera, are
costs.
fee-based.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I think that means we are ready for public comment, and I think we have at least one, yes.
Yes, Christina Evans.
Christine. Welcome. Well, how are you?
Good to see you.
So, I am going to be speaking a little bit about information that the Baltimore Movement of Rank and File Educators has collected from teachers about the implementation of wit and wisdom, covering a couple different themes. First, pacing. There's been some inconsistent messaging from North Avenue about where teachers are supposed to be in relation to reality and what is possible given the amount of time in a day. There's my second theme, it's going to be accountability without support. And then several of the comments also touch on the amount of prep times that these new lessons take. The comments are also going to touch on the themes of materials. Basically, teachers don't have them consistently. Carpet time and what is developmentally appropriate for our youngest learners. Content. So this concern actually has come from parents. I got messages from a particular parent, why is there so much on war and farming? And where's the culturally responsive piece? That's come from multiple parents. And then the overall thing that I want to touch on at the end is the fact that equity can't happen unless we start from a place of abundance. Because if you start from a place of scarcity and then try to approach equity, what's gonna happen is that students with strong advocates are gonna get more. Students with fewer advocates in their lives are going to get less. You cannot approach equity unless you start from a place of abundance, which we did not. So in sharing some of the comments, the first question that we asked was for teachers to reflect on how their students are reacting to the curriculum. And one of the things that I'm going to share is, sorry, internet is acting funny, so I'm pulling it up on my phone. How have your students responded to wit and wisdom? Students seem a bit confused. They also don't like that they have to share text. Additionally, the students cannot really read the text because they are all above their grade level. With a lot of frustration, the readings are way above grade level and not grade level appropriate. Students with IEPs and ESL services are completely lost, and there aren't any supplemental materials to teach students who are English learners or reading below grade level. My students aren't meeting curriculum expectations. They seem to be overwhelmed by the task and have a hard time remaining focused given the 90-minute plus minute blocks. Daily questions and questions about questions are confusing. Students are not able to feel success or the mastery of content. The kindergartners are not responding because the concepts are over their heads as novice learners. Additionally, the time frames indicated for carpet time are too long for 60-month-old toddlers, said with love. That's the teacher's comment in parentheses. In order to implement with fidelity, the phonological and phonemic awareness as well as phonics activities are not emphasized. The wit and wisdom time block spills into other content areas with a number of brain breaks and wiggle time needed to create the play-based and movement nature that is necessary for the youngest learners. We asked teachers about what's been positive, and we got a lot of comments, but a lot of the comments had to do with the content area. Students are enjoying learning about the sea. Students are enjoying the art that's infused. The word count for the negative comments are 5 times on this survey, the word count for the positive comments. My time is up, so I'll yield to questions.
To go on a little further? So, okay.
Well, no, I was going to ask if you have your information that you could share with us in writing, because it's a little difficult even hearing as you're sort of reading
Sure,
it off.
sure.
And then possibly we could then respond a little bit easier.
Okay, it will take a little bit of time because when we collected this data, we assured teachers that we'd be keeping their identifying information confidential. So I'm going to have to pull it out of the Google form, copy paste it into an email, and send it to you. But I can do that as I sit here after I'm done with public comment.
So just to make sure I understand, so you sent out a survey?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right, to teachers? So
We also
teachers-
talk to a lot of teachers. I mean, I feel like one of the first questions we've been asking people in our face-to-face conversation is, how's wit and wisdom going? Because we invested a lot of time in learning about it in the spring, and so it's been very much on our minds. So these are conversations and a survey that we put out.
Well, yeah, I think we would love to be able to see the survey. And Chief Connolly would also, so, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Important information. Is there anyone else who would like to comment? Yes?
Hello. So my name is Ebony McKeever, and I'm actually here representing PCAB. And the one thing that I will say is I love that earlier you addressed the fact that we are presenting policies that are to be implemented. And actually, let me go back to my notes that I was taking. Around the master plan, and also as I was listening to the 2018 PARCC results with the ELA and the math. And the one thing that I do want to state is that there isn't enough contact with parents and community members. I don't think that we're doing enough to even come to PCAB and say, this is the information that we want to present. What ways can PCAB be useful in getting the information out to parents and community members? Yeah, and I just don't need the whole 3 minutes, but that is what I did want to say. I'm listening a lot of times, and even with the PARCC results, and as they were presenting the information, and it was brought up, how are we empowering parents? What are we doing to involve parents? And it seemed like, with the exception of the special education, that the comments were, we're already going to piggyback on meetings that the CEO has already developed, and there wasn't an actual push to go out into the communities or to go out into the schools and say, how are we helping parents? I think a lot of time we forget that sometimes parents may not be up to speed with even just like wit and wisdom and the information that's being presented. And so if we aren't empowering or getting the information to parents, then how are we wanting the parents to actually be able to help their students when the students are bringing home the homework? Or how are we expecting parents? I think it was like, we're asking parents to seek the information, to go to the schools and get the information. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to kind of get everyone involved. So I would like to say or recommend that I do encourage everyone, just as we're presenting policies, I know that PCAB is not necessarily always the first group that you think of, but I would like to ask that we do come to PCAB more often. There are a lot of members that are currently sitting on the PCAB board that are very invested in making sure that we make sure that we're getting parents and community members involved so that we can help the district in creating more proficient students throughout the city.
So you're asking for for us to come to PCAB meetings?
Absolutely.
Okay, and when's your next meeting?
This Thursday.
Okay, at what time?
6:30.
In here, right?
Yes. Or actually, I think we might be upstairs, either one of the two,
okay.
but we'll be.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question or.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Where is this coming from? Oh, I don't know what that is.
I said something and I was passing on. I was just saying thank you. I think that was an important comment that you made, and I know that all the offices, for teaching and learning are listening. So hopefully we will have a better strategy to be certain that PCAB is more involved.
Yeah, and I know also too, like we've even kind of tossed around the idea of being able to come to you all and say, is it a possibility that somebody may be able to sit and listen during the teaching and learning committee members or meetings, and just not in the audience, but actually to be able to ask questions and to participate as we're listening to the presentations. Well, it's in the air, but.
Yeah, and Commissioner Chinya is the veteran member, so I had to make sure that you, but what are some recommendations? You're a parent, I'm assuming?
I am a parent. I'm also an educator as well.
Wonderful. What are some of the suggestions or recommendations that you might have from your perspective to get information out to parents and the communities in more innovative ways than are currently being practiced?
So one of the things that I always think of, I think our go-to is always surveys and emails, and we'll find that parents and community members aren't always as responsive. And then I think the next thing is that people always want to say, well, let's use social media as a tool. I'm not sure that is always an effective tool. I know that in the classroom, one of the things that I try to do is I try to actually create resource guides for parents and make sure that there are multiple ways that those resource guides get to parents. So we're not only talking about, through social media or through emails, but we're sending them home with students. As soon as parents come into the office and they want to come in because of whatever reason, we have that available in the school for parents to take and receive as they're coming into the school building. I think also I wouldn't say also times, but I think also too, what we need to do is just not kind of like piggyback on CEO events. But I think a lot of times we need to be creating our own events and creating momentum behind our own events to be able to reach out to parent and community members as well and meet them where they are. Parents go to grocery stores, parents go to, libraries. There are a ton of different avenues where we can meet parents who have children in Baltimore City schools. I don't think that it necessarily has to be that we either have to have an event and they come to us. There are lots of places where we can meet parents at.
And the reason why I'm asking specifically what are some ways, because I also find this challenging in engaging parents who are not your traditional 9 to 5 parents that work, but figuring out ways to engage folks that are innovative. So yes, this is for committee, but I'm also just curious to know too, or to get that feedback on some ways that I might, and that we as a system may be able to engage parents that are not those traditional working parents or are traditional working parents but work odd hours or different hours that are different from how we traditionally operate as a school system.
And I was going to say, a lot of times I think we forget that we can reach out to other community entities. If we just think about, the 2 largest hospital systems in the city and the number of people that they employ, and even if they're not necessarily employing the parents, which I know they are employing the parents, but if they're not necessarily employing the parents, they're employing a brother, they're employing an uncle, they're employing somebody who can get that information to, as you were saying, like the non-traditional working parents, maybe the parents who, are, like you said, may not have a job or also, may be working odd hours as well.
I think it would be also cool, not to belabor
Yes.
the time, but I think it would also be cool to engage the MTA
Absolutely.
around promoting and advertising different events, different curriculum updates, because a lot of our number one, our students use the MTA often, but also a lot of our parents do as well. So that would be an interesting something to see.
So yes, I was just up here to say, don't forget PCAB. We have a lot of innovative ideas where we're really looking to change the fabric of how the district looks and the way that we can participate in that as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you
you.
for your input. And that concludes our meeting. We will meet next on November 5th at 3:30, right here.
It's the day after election
So
day.
it's the day after Election Day.
It is.
Oh, dear. We're going to meet anyway.
And
We're going to
still gonna be
celebrate
here.
here. We'll be here, okay.
Oh, you said the day we're meeting that Monday.
Oh, we're meeting Monday. It's the
Oh,
day
so it's the day
before.
The day
I
before.
thought that date didn't, yeah, okay. Thank you. We will meet on Monday. So that is important to announce. We will be meeting on Monday, November 5th. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you all. Have a lovely evening. Thanks.